Hello, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another of my interview series. Today I'm very excited because I'm going to be talking with Geoff Buys Cars. Geoff from Geoff Buys Cars, a YouTube channel, fantastic channel, all about cars and more, it seems. Let's talk to Geoff because, hello Geoff,
Good
I would
afternoon.
like to talk about electric cars because this is the thing we're all supposed to be buying.
We are, yes. They are the future.
And yet, when you look at if everybody did buy cars, and this is what my viewers keep telling me, hang on a minute, this isn't, how does this work? Because if we all suddenly buy all these electric cars, there's huge amounts of problems with it. It's all been sold as the rosy answer to life, the universe, and everything, gets rid of pollution, saves the planet, all that sort of nonsense. And yet, actually, there's a little bit more to do with it. Now, you famously made a video about the Royal Mail, which I believe went quite viral, and
It,
you effectively said if they do follow what they said they're going to do and get rid of the fleet and replace it with electric vehicles of a similar sort of size and what have you, it would basically bankrupt them.
yeah,
So,
absolutely. I mean, the concept was 41,500 petrol and diesel vans, the cost of purchasing electric vans to replace them, and whether or not it would be viable. The video was then shared on their own internal platforms. And I'm even told that Mr. Simon Thompson, the chairman of Royal Mail, responded to it himself, which was interesting. But as you say, the problem with the electric car argument is if you take it on its face value of the running costs over a year and the emissions over a year, then they are impossible to beat with any other form of personal transport. However, the electric cars don't exist in purely in a vacuum of yearly output and cost. You have many other things that come into that as well, and that really is whenever I'm making videos about this on my channel, I really want to look at them in the terms of the big picture and not just at those two things that they're sold on.
right, absolutely. Now, my girlfriend used to drive with her ex a hybrid. So
Okay.
the hybrid. Now, I just should say, I'm not a car person.
Yeah.
People who watch my channel will probably realize there's certain areas like football, I'm not very good at all at. And cars is another thing I'm not very good at. And she will go, that's a nice car. And I will go, I'll take your word for it. She
Fair
drove
enough.
this very nice, very comfortable, very large electric hybrid that continually needs to be charged up. And she's told me a little bit about electric cars. And one of the things I understand is that it's cheaper to fill it up at the moment. It seems to be, although we're in this, all the fuel prices is going up. But if you charge your car up and it costs whatever it does, you go on holiday for 2 weeks. The car is not as charged as it was. Whereas if you'd filled it with
Absolutely.
petrol, the petrol pretty much is still there.
Yeah, and again, a large part of growth on my YouTube channel and social feeds this winter has been with these Tesla charging videos. So a follower of mine sent me a video of the queue of Teslas waiting to charge at T-Base services on the edge of the Lake District.
Right.
And that's when, for me, I started to see the sort of hypocrisy of this. People were waiting 10, 15 hours to charge their cars. So on the back of that, there's been another big article that was published in, I think, the Times recently. A journalist saying, I've had enough. My electric car has ruined, I think he said, two holidays and two Christmases because of problems either with the car or with charging. So, again, you go back to what we first opened up with. Yes, they don't emit so much from the tailpipe. Yes, they are technically cheaper to run, but there's a whole load of other stuff that goes along with it. With a hybrid, you're in a kind of a better position because you've got the backup of the petrol engine, but in many cases as well, that petrol engine is compromised. So it might not be the most economical when it's running on petrol, for example. So the idea that you could start your car and run the first 15, 20, 30 miles on electric, that's great. I'm okay with that. But if you're then kicking in a petrol engine, that petrol engine has to be a good one and it has to be economical. The problem we have is a lot of government legislation and taxation is pushing towards these lower emissions vehicles where they don't necessarily work for the people. So if I
Mm.
give you an example, a friend of mine has a company car. He does a lot of driving around the country. Previously, he would have had an old diesel, something like a Vectra that would have done 60 miles to the gallon. Fill it up once, you get miles and miles and miles from your tank. But now, because of the way company car tax works, he has a BMW 330e, which is a hybrid with a petrol engine. So yes, it's great. He can run on electric all the way to the motorway, but he's only getting about 35 miles to the gallon average out of that car overall. So the government is saying it's cheaper for you to have this car. We want you to have this car because it's better for the environment, but it's using twice the amount of fuel. So is it really? It's quite a bizarre situation that we find ourselves in.
So there's a lot of sort of hypocrisy in all of this. I mean, going back to your lake, at the lakes, the service station at the lakes, and people queue for 15 hours, unless you can budget that time. I don't know how people can operate. If you're trying to go, if you're a representative of a company and you've got lots of calls to do and it means driving a lot and you want to just fill and go like we all do, how do what are you going to do? It's like almost, it comes to mind, it's like the old Coach and Horses where you've got to change the horses. I better pick up a different car to do the next part of my... What was that? To do a different part of my journey. And that would be, that is a very backward step.
I agree. And maybe there is something in that. Maybe we would be better off having a system where you drive your electric car, you then decant your battery that is discharged and pick up a new battery and carry on with that. Maybe it's to do with the infrastructure.
But they're quite big, though, aren't they? Those they're not like even the size of an ordinary car battery just to get it started.
Well, yeah, and again, that's another one of these things that is never discussed when we're talking about the benefits of electric cars, less emissions and less cost. You have a gigantic battery, which has been manufactured for starters. There's something to do with that. But also the sheer weight of these batteries means that the wear on your tires and your brakes, and let's not forget a lot of the emissions and the bad stuff that's in the air that we breathe in. It doesn't just come from the burning of the fuel. It comes from your tires breaking down, your brakes breaking down. And these heavy electric cars are putting more of that into the atmosphere. So we cannot look at electric cars as the savior of the future purely by looking at the emissions from the tailpipe and the cost of them.
Right, yes. So things like, as you say, cars are going to be heavier, are they? Is that the overall thing? Because the batteries are that much heavier?
Well, at the moment in America, they're actually looking at... reinforcing the infrastructure of the roads, believe it or not, because obviously in America they love pickup trucks, they love these great big SUVs, and as these vehicles become electric, they're pushing 3.5 tons. So the people who run the roads in America, whatever they're called, are saying, hang on a minute, can our roads really take the increase in weight for the traffic volume that we have? Which seems bizarre, doesn't it?
Well, so then if you've got more of these very heavier vehicles running on these very heavy batteries, etc., and the infrastructure suddenly needs to be upgraded, all of that then is a huge amount of work, industrial work, which presumably is going to have its own CO2 carbon footprint related effect on it, that at the moment we don't have that problem.
So if we want to move to EV and we need to improve the road network and the charging network because we're saving the planet with these cars, and we're also ignoring the fact that the very act of making the electric car produced 80% more harmful stuff in the actual build of it, we've got more harmful stuff being created in the build of the car. We've got more harmful stuff being created in the build of the infrastructure and the backing up of the structures that we have that the cars drive on. So really, any savings and planet-saving kudos that we've got from the vehicle is really dwarfed by everything that's going on around it.
I was sent a very curious email by one of my viewers who put this point, that in history we would walk, and then we would ride animals, horses being the most obvious, horse and cart, pony and cart, that sort of thing. Then we had the beginnings of a mechanical means of transport, and we eventually had the car. We had steam versions of the car. We now have petrol and diesel and all of that. But because of the rules about electric cars, now that we have the electric car, it will mean that all those historic, apart from horses and carts presumably, the the historic petrol, diesel, and all of those sort of things, the heritage vehicles, would not be allowed anymore to travel on our roads. Therefore, and of course, even steam trains for heritage railways, all of that, it's almost as if history is then stopped because groups that do all this stuff, people who've got their old favourite, whatever, classic car, would not be able to use them. Is that going to be the state of play?
It seems like we are heading in that direction, and I probably need to go on record and say I don't have a problem with electric cars at all. If you would like to drive an electric car and if it works for you, absolutely fine. Where the problems are is in, as you say, it's in the legislation and the framework that is being built around it, and also the subsidies as well. So, like I say, you can't take it on face value because it doesn't necessarily make sense for what they're selling it for. But the big push and the legislative push for us to move over to electric seems to be what is getting people's backs up. But as you say, there does seem to be a real deletion of history with us suddenly saying, oh, these cars are all so bad. But look at what these cars have allowed us to achieve. And there are also the state of Wyoming in the USA, which is pretty barren and pretty cold. They've actually now gone the other way. And just in the last few days, have started to introduce a bill of legislation to actually ban the sale of electric cars from 2035. They've looked at everything on balance and said, you know what, it's crazy. As a state, they're saying this doesn't work for us. We have a proud history of being, a working state, and a lot of that is built on petrol and gas and the ability to go places. It's very rural, it's very big, it's very cold, and electric doesn't work.
We have 7 years until 2030 for this plan to work, in which so if I've got this right, they're not going to be selling diesel and petrol cars after that point. But presumably if you've got one, you can still run it for a while. Is that right?
For now, yes.
For now. I mean, absolutely. Things are, who knows? People are over in a certain Switzerland town at the moment deciding what's the next exciting bits for us to have.
Well, they've been hitting a meteorite, haven't they?
They may well. I read a wonderful book about that. Check out a previous video, and you'll hear all about that.
But no, you're absolutely right. So the plan is to stop the production of petrol and diesel cars in 2030. But I'm hearing murmurings from my network that this is already causing problems in, for example, the taxi industry. So a gentleman got in touch with me and says, look, I normally buy my taxis from like an intermediary between the manufacturer and the taxi drivers. And he's saying we're finding it very hard to get the vehicles that we want, the vehicles that they want being economical petrol or diesel, large enough cars that are suitable for taxi use. And he's saying that the knock-on effect of that is that the price of old taxis is climbing. So he gave me a ridiculous example of a driver of his bought a Mercedes, these Mercedes vans, the big comfortable 7-seat, 8, 9-seat things.
Yes.
A driver of his bought one of them, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but it doesn't matter. I think he bought it on 40,000 miles, and let's say he paid 27 grand for it. He then put 200,000 miles on it, and because of what's happening in the market, he sold it for £20,000 profit.
Wow.
So the knock-on effect of this 2030 ban is already being felt. But I don't know if we are starting to move away from the push to electric cars, or if it's just the algorithm presenting me stories that are feeding into what I like to read about. But I am feeling like people are starting to question the true credentials of these electric cars.
I mean, presumably if a government was very serious about this, and I often question in my videos in a sort of giving the benefit of the doubt to the government, thinking that they must have our best interests at heart, because why wouldn't they? Otherwise, they wouldn't exist. Surely we would have got rid of them if they were evil in any shape or form, one would hope. And so you would think that they must be digging up the roads all over the place, that the infrastructure with charging points everywhere for the convenience of everyone, and new batteries are being manufactured and already stored, and all of this has been thought out. If in 7 years' time they're going to persuade people to get rid of their diesel vehicles or their petrol vehicles, their economic affordable vehicles, shall we say, and then go down this other mechanism, almost, well, mandated to a degree, until the point where you can't get the petrol, and all of that's actually stopped at the pump. You kind of think, well, I look out my window, and yes, there's roadworks going on, but it might be the gas board or the other sort of electric board, but they're not putting in the installation. And I'm not seeing petrol pumps where you've got bay after bay after bay where you can charge your electric car or swap your electric car for another electric car that will do the next 300 miles or whatever like that. And you just think, well, if they don't start now, when are they going to start?
You're quite right. And I also had another comment drop in my email inbox last night from a gentleman that said there was 1,000 houses being built close to where he lives. And he went and spoke to someone who was involved and asked about, are these houses being put in with electric car chargers? Because you'd think if we're all moving that direction, then surely it should be considered for the build of the house. And the reply came, no. And the system isn't even capable of supporting it, even if we wanted to. So again, it doesn't quite figure, because if everybody tried to switch over to electric tomorrow, well, based on my understanding, the entire grid would collapse. We've already seen in California, for example, we've had moments where they've turned around and said, right, nobody charge your electric car. We haven't got the power for it. So there's a whole load of things that just don't seem to be being considered.
And especially now we're seeing the problem with supply anyway of electricity and gas, with war in Ukraine and problems with energy supply coming from wherever. And you sort of think, well, they're already saying there might be blackouts. And you think, well, hang on a minute. If there might be blackouts, surely if that's going to be a problem, it's not a wise thing to try and push us all down where everything is going to be reliant on electricity. Why can't we have a much longer transition until the electric and the renewable generation of it is so stable and proved to be reliable, and it doesn't matter if the sun goes in or the wind doesn't blow, that we can still generate enough, whether that be with a little extra help from nuclear or whatever it is. That's what it seems to me. It's bonkers to be trying to push everything into this one size fits all, when clearly, not only domestically but industrially, how the hell? I mean, it just seems anybody can think of this for more than 2 minutes. You'll start going, how does this work? Surely this is a nutty scheme.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Some of the comments that popped up on my Royal Mail video were saying that Amazon had opened a depot and they wanted it to be, zero emission and all this stuff. So they bought all the electric vans, which were backed up by diesel generations at the base to power the electric vans. And then this gentleman who contacted me said, well, in the morning I had a parcel arrive in an Amazon electric van. And then in the afternoon, the rest of my delivery arrived in a unbranded, rented diesel, because the electric vans weren't good enough to do the full round. So with the businesses as well, this isn't just on the consumer.
Yeah.
Businesses who are falling for this and saying, okay, I will jump on the electric bandwagon, are going out and buying these vehicles and finding that they just don't work in the real world. I'm not saying that they don't work for everybody. There will be people who, maybe they've been given the car as part of a company scheme, so the cost of the vehicle is negated, and maybe they charge it at home and they do 15 miles to work, and that's the perfect vehicle for them, and that's brilliant. But for the vast majority of human beings who own a car, an electric car isn't actually a viable replacement.
Yeah, no, it does seem as if this has been dreamed up by a man who only goes 5 minutes down the road and is more thinking of the old Sinclair C5 and that sort of thing, rather than actually a practical implication for the rest of the world.
Sorry.
No, go on.
Just while you're on the Sinclair C5, I think that's a really good point that you've brought up, because the Sinclair C5 was about cheap transport for the masses. Whereas what we're seeing in the electric car world is we're not seeing cheap, lightweight, easy transport that makes transport accessible for people. We're seeing giant 3-ton SUVs that are £90,000 and more, that seem to be more about status and your Instagram than actually about saving the planet or going places frugally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so then you move on to this sort of, again, another nutty concept that seems to be being forced on us that people haven't voted for, which is a continual thing. Things that we have not actually been consulted or voted for. These so-called 15-minute cities, in which they want to try and contain the number of journeys that you make in and around a city to, in the words that they use, to control traffic and reduce emissions and all of this sort of stuff. I don't know whether it makes a difference in the way they go and charge you, whether you're driving an electric car or a fossil fuel based car. Do you know whether there would be an exemption if so in other words, if you're limited to 100 journeys, if you cross over certain zones as it's been described, if you're in an electric car, you should, pardon?
Checkpoints.
Checkpoints. Well, they would be. I mean, they've got to check, haven't they? Surely there'll be a man with a barrier, won't there, with a peak cap, who's going to be very polite. Oh, hello, sir. Can I just check if you do 100 journeys? Let's have a look at your card. Oh, yes, I see you've done 99 journeys. Just one more journey, sir. Then I'm afraid I will have to be rather officious next time.
Notwithstanding, that's 100 journeys per family, not per vehicle or per person.
Well, this is it. There's so many sort of weird connotations because presumably, unless they can identify the driver, it's going to be the car and then the keeper of the car who gets clobbered, which is very unfair if that happens to be, say, a disabled person and they have a chauffeur who's doing the journeys and then has to get home at night and takes the car because the disabled person can't drive, so he doesn't really need it, but he's employing the other bloke. But anyway, all of that. But if you have an electric car, do they get any preferential treatment?
I'm not aware that they do. Again, there's another one of those things where we seem to be moving in one direction, but not necessarily all joined up. So as far as I'm aware, if you own an electric car, these 15-minute neighborhood low traffic zones, you're not allowed through, emissions or not. So I think when you did your video on these low traffic 15-minute neighborhoods, you used the word insidious. And I think I have to completely agree. There's far too much within those 15-minute neighborhoods that seems more like unnecessary restrictions. And when I did my video on it, I questioned, why should anybody else judge whether your journey is unnecessary? How can you, to have a government body or some sort of think tank who are sitting there to work out, well, what journeys are necessary and what journeys are unnecessary, so we can work out whether you're allowed to go on your journey. I find that quite terrifying.
Yes, that anybody can make the decision for you of what is important to you at any one time. And I mean, would you get an exemption if it was an emergency and your hospital is across the zone? You've done your 100. You've been a good boy. You've done all that. You go, I can't drive now for another 2 weeks until the end of this year, and then mother's taken ill. It's taking 5 to 10 hours or 10 days for an ambulance to come, and you're thinking, sod this, I'm going to put her in the car. So you save the taxpayer the cost of the ambulance, but you get penalised for going across. And could you then go, wait, hang on a minute, it's this? Or if you're chasing somebody who's just stolen your precious colour television or whatever it is, and you're going, I'm going to catch you, and you slip. There must be so many things. It'd just be a nightmare for administration, I would think, for their end.
Absolutely. So many questions. And, you mentioned earlier on about consultations, and I dug fairly deeply into the consultation on the Oxford traffic filter scheme, and I looked in some depth at the responses that people were saying to it, and it was all very, very vague. There were not many people that were saying, this scheme makes sense, for starters. It is fantastic, and we want it. And yet here we are, they're introducing it. The traffic filters are starting to go up, and seems to me like another ignored consultation where the public were either deliberately misled, deliberately confused, or just ignored completely.
So on your channel, tell me a bit about channel. Let's give you some, so anybody watching mine will know what to do. What do you normally do?
Normally, I make accessible, fun car videos for people. So prior to dipping my toes into explaining stuff, which my videos lately seem to be more me explaining things to people, I would buy a car and I would do a review on it and I would have a little bit of fun and then try and sell it for a small profit and make a video about it. It was as simple as that. And I would do fun things like I bought a 7-seater and I thought, well, how fast can I sit in every one of these 7 seats? But every car that I bought it became an adventure in one way or another. So I'd buy a car from Timbuktu, jump on a train, take my skateboard with me, and then film the whole journey and then meet the person that bought the car. That was the original concept, but not too much unlike yourself. Of late, I find myself making slightly more controversial videos because I want to protect the freedom that I enjoy. And the freedom that I enjoy is going on road trips,
Mm.
basically. I like driving my car, up and down this country, over through Europe. I want to be able to do that. And all I see around me at the moment is threats to that thing that I enjoy. So it's not like my car videos are on hold at the minute. It's just that there's bigger fish to fry if I want to keep making the car videos.
And we've had cars now for 100 years. You know, you think of the London to Brighton rally, which is what the highlight, I suppose, in this country, celebrating all those classic cars. Presumably, with the low carbon business, that would have to halt, or you'd have to have a very special exemption, presumably, to allow that to happen, which would, it would just make it just smell funny about it. Although
Yeah.
I'm sure they smell funny anyway because they're old-fashioned cars, which is fantastic. That good old petrol smell. But it is this time. This is a weird time to be in which things like a car that we take for granted now has been here, as if somebody has decided that we almost don't want it anymore. We've made this oh, there we are. I've got a 10-minute warning coming up on the screen. It sort of pops up. I'll have to cough up the cash and invest in Zoom, I think. Yeah, pay the meter. So don't forget to donate and subscribe, all that stuff. But it's almost as if you can't help feeling as if governments or other bodies almost want to outlaw that public freedom, the freedoms that we've had, the ability to get into a cost-effective vehicle that isn't really, especially these days with the wonderful technology we've got to reduce all the emissions and things like that and make it safer all the time. And of course, that technology would always continue until you'd have something that was pretty much emission-free. You can imagine, scientists given a chance to sort of carry on that work. And yet, it is almost as if here's a solution to a problem we never really had, and actually it's going to kill the car industry and by default your freedom to move about.
Completely agree. So instead of saying we're going to replace your petrol and diesel cars with these fantastic things that make sense, they're saying you now have electric cars. The infrastructure isn't quite there. The barriers to entry, i.e., the cost of the car, is huge. But that's what you're doing, so you don't have a choice. It does feel to me like it's not so much we want you out of your car and into an electric one. It's more like we just want you out of your car. And that's where I get concerned, and that's why I keep making videos about it.
And that's why I keep questioning the weird world that's going on. And I hope that anybody watching this who might, be watching this and thinking, oh, they're just talking old rubbish. It is worth just having an open mind and doing a little bit of investigative work yourself and just going, would it work? If we did this, would it all work? How does it work? Because I'd love to know the answers, really.
And I completely agree. And I've got to say once again, I know in the comments on this video, you will have the EV brigade who love EVs and they work for, EVs work for them and they think the electric car is fantastic. And I really don't have a problem with that at all. But I would implore everyone to ask the question of, does it work if we move to adopt these things en masse? Have we got the infrastructure? Is the raw material there to make the batteries? And is it feasible and does it make sense?
Geoff, it's been a fantastic conversation. We've hopefully opened people's minds to question a few things. We can find you at Geoff Buys Cars. I'll put the link on the YouTube channel in the description, so do check that out. Do check out some of the stuff. You've recently done a very interesting one about police cars and them going off.
for that one.
Oh, well, there. He hasn't done anything to do with police cars whatsoever. Don't check the channel out for any of that, because otherwise they'll be after you too. Thank you.
I have to admit, after I made that video, my father phoned me and he said, "You'd better make sure your cars are taxed and insured at the moment."
Yeah,
Oh, no.
I can see why. It's been an absolute joy. Stay there, Geoff. I'll say to you goodbye to you properly. But from the channel, thank you so much. It's been brilliant. And do check him out. And yeah, we look forward to your comments. Till next time, from us, goodbye.